Welcome to Saints and Sevens, a Trench Crusade community podcast. My name is Jesse Aiken, and I'm joined by my co-host, Johnny. Johnny, how are you doing today?
Good, brother. How you doing?
Very excited to get this going. This is something you and I have been working on behind the scenes for a very, very long time. So, Johnny, what are we doing here?
What are we doing here? Well, we are here about Trench Crusade because it's a game that I love and I've been chewing your ear off for a while about. And I finally pulled you over to the dark side of Trench Crusade. Very excited about that.
I am too.
And you're new. You're new to Trench Crusade.
Yeah, for sure. And it's a game I've been eyeing for a long time. And then Johnny kind of took me over to the dark side. I've also got a very deep history with the lore and the lore adjacency of this game. So it was kind of an easy sell in that respect. But additionally, too, we want to make a community-focused podcast that really not only builds Trench Crusade up, but also hopefully expands your experiences with the game. Additionally, too, we're a show for new players, Johnny. That's going to be one of our big focuses, right?
Yeah, definitely to help with that learning curve. Because, the game's still, very new in its infancy. It just, at the end of last year, had its official first full rule set. I believe in August, 1.0 came out. And they've already done some updates on it. So I've been playing the game for, I guess, since beta dropped. Since they actually dropped the beta out to the public. I started playing it with some buddies at my local game shop. And just fell in love with the game as a rule set. Aesthetically, I thought it was really rad, obviously. But the rules are really what got me. And when I saw Tomas at Nova last year, the first thing I did, I told him, I was like, hey, Tomas, I got to let you know, this is hands down possibly the best rule set I've played in over 30 years of wargaming. I'm a huge fan of it. It's so simple and accessible for players, which I think is great for new players, especially to wargaming, people that don't have that background, to be able to come into a game that's very accessible, low model count, because you're talking skirmish level game, right? Which for anyone who is uninitiated, that basically means, you're, 5 to 15 models max. Most of that's going to be in that 7 to 12 range, maybe at the top end if you're using a bunch of models. And which makes modeling and the hobbying aspects of the game, much less intimidating to get into. And the aesthetics just great. The gameplay is amazing. So I fell in love with it very early on. It's got a heavy narrative focus, which is something that I really love and I think is lacking in a lot of like miniature war games nowadays. You don't see as much of that emphasis on a narrative kind of campaign style gameplay. And that's one of the things that a lot of people who have a background in some of the more grimdark games like Mordheim and some of the 28 games, that's a culture of games that came out of Mordheim that are deeply steeped in the grimdark aesthetic. But Mordheim specifically was one of those games that the campaign system is notoriously painful to play. You can fall behind very quickly. The rules are very tough to play in a balanced sort of manner. And the same group that wrote the Mordheim system are the people who wrote the campaign system for Trench Crusade. And let me tell you, they got it right. It's a great system. So that's kind of my background with Trench Crusade and how I got into it. And I have been singing its praises since day one to anyone who would listen to me that this game is incredible from a gameplay perspective. And, aesthetically, I dig it.
The aesthetic is very cool. And also there's a lot of opportunities for digging into the lore and also learning more about the lore, which is something we're going to pursue on this show pretty aggressively. We really want to expand on the game's aesthetic in a lot of ways. So my story with Trench Crusade is a little bit shorter, which is very exciting. I got into it this year, 2026, due to Johnny and other players that I really respect, really enjoying it. It's a game I always had my eye on when I saw the Kickstarter stuff. I saw the rule set and I was like, oh, that looks really tight. And then what really sold me, Johnny, is I'm sure anyone following me for years would know, alternating activations, skirmish, those are kind of my two go-tos. And then after that is kind of everything else. So essentially if you're alternating activations, skirmish, and then you're a lore and aesthetic I like, I'm interested, right? But what's crazy with that is the next part was, like you said, the rule set. Very simple, very straightforward. And then you add this entire element of narrative onto the game that, frankly, a lot of skirmish games that I play don't have in the same way. They have the narrative, and that's hugely strong, especially in like the Marvel and Star Wars systems, which I've played for years. But it's not inherently tied to the rules, or in fact, it's not inherently tied to a tournament. So let's talk about how Trench Crusade is a little bit different in the sense of if you're playing a skirmish game at your local store, what is Trench Crusade going to give you in a narrative sense that's different flavor, other than just like, oh, you've got a beautiful different list in front of me. I've got a beautiful different list. We got all this really interesting terrain. Well, there's another step that's not been talked about yet that we should talk about, which is the narrative post-game and the continued narrative league element.
So you can play the game in a couple different ways, which is like a basic pickup. Generally speaking, I think the default right now is 900 ducats. Ducats is basically it's a coin system from history.
That's right.
Contextually, the game is set in an alternate history for the world, and it's a coin system from that time. But it's basically your point system for your models, right? Like any other game system might have MCP as threat. BattleTech has battle value, whatever it may be. That's how you buy your models. Then they also have an additional point system called Glory, which generally speaking on a pickup game, you're somewhere in that 3 to 7 range of Glory, which allows you to buy mercenaries and certain battle kit that you can't normally get, from a basic Duke cost level because it's, much more powerful. Those things come into play though when you're playing the narrative campaign. So there's a campaign mode that is deeply ingrained into the system, and I would offer is the best way to play the game currently. And it is a series of scenarios that you're able to roll, and it changes between what numbers of games you're in. So if you're in a 12 game campaign with your buddies, the first 3 to 4 games will be off of one chart of scenarios that you roll for, and then the next 4 would be off of another chart, and so on and so forth, all the way through. You play your game. Each scenario has a series of like epic deeds basically that are associated with it. That if you accomplish these, they're kind of like achievements in other games that you could think of. You get, whereas other games you might get an achievement point, these actually give you glory points, and those glory points are be able to be expended for benefits later on. And then there's this entire post-game series of events that you do where you can either rebuild your warband, you can go and recruit new guys, you can buy new battle kit, you can sell battle kit, you can explore, which means you go to these, you're rolling on these charts, right? And you're going to these other locations and you're finding maybe like holy icons or unholy icons, depending on what side you're playing. You're finding like hidden stashes and all this kinds of stuff that can give you more glory. Yeah. You can find merchants that you can buy secret stuff from later on in the campaign. So it's really cool, but it's not like a RPG level amount of information that you have to bookkeep. It's just kind of some charts and a few things that you do. You're also able to take your models and promote them along the way. So you can take someone who's a regular troop at the beginning of the game, promote them up to being an elite in the middle, which means you get them better, battle kit and gear. They get special benefits, which is super cool also. So like you can take a troop and give him like inhuman strength or something, and he's running around with a giant 2-handed machine gun that, usually takes 2 people to fire, and he's just hip firing it like Arnold Schwarzenegger in Commando, or whatever. So yeah, it's really great. And then you just kind of roll on, you increase your ducat amounts as you get that from exploration and from achievements. And you can continue to grow out your army or your warband. What's cool is there's an inherent balancing point in there where each game, as it progresses through the campaign, is limited by how many models you can have in your warband. So it doesn't matter if you just like struck gold and you've got all the money in the world, you can still only field like 8 models in your second game or something like that.
Right.
Which is a great way to balance it. And the other thing that works really well in the favor of the game is the Trench Companion app, which is a web-based app. It is not an App Store app, so you're not going to find it in like Apple or the Google Play or anything like that. It's a web-based app called Trench Companion that's run by the guys. And the campaign tracker in there is fantastic. You track everything. You track your promotions. You track what you have, the battle kit, all that kinds of stuff. It's a really extremely well-designed app, and it is a very accessible means to look at the rules, which you can get for free in the app. So campaign's where it's at.
It's super cool. And a part you haven't talked about yet is the element of your guys can die in the campaign too. A massive part.
Oh, yes.
Or they have negative setbacks, right?
Yeah, that can happen. You get like really atrocious injuries to your guys. It's pretty great.
There's a story there.
There's a story there. And of course your guys can die off, and then and that's what's really great that they did with the campaign system for Trench Crusade or say like Mordheim is when your guys die, there's basically a point in the game where you can come to the end of that round of the scenario or that scenario in the campaign round, and you can look at it and be like, man, I lost all of my dudes. I got totally table wiped, or like I'm down to like 3 people left in my warband. And sure, you can explore and you can use your ducats to like recruit new guys, or basically you can wash your entire warband, retire them, and basically start fresh at that stage in the campaign. And it's a fantastic like balancing maneuver that allows you never to feel like you fall too far behind to ever actually still be on parity on everybody else along the lines.
Which is super cool. But also all the boons and all the setbacks are also super cool too, because they tell a story, right? Like
it's such a good story.
if there's a guy that got really hurt game one and he's still hurt the last game, but he's still around, that's pretty cool. Like he's got some sort of negative movement modifier or something, right? But he's still around. Like that guy, he was in the long haul, you know?
Oh yeah.
Dig that.
And I think that's what's cool about the campaign element for the Trench Crusade, especially in a game that is at its core a mini agnostic game. Now they have produced kits, right? They're producing plastic kits now through Archon Studios. Where previously it was all STLs and able to be printable. But in what is effectively at its heart a miniature agnostic game, you have the ability to do so much customization and hobbying with your models. So if you got a guy who his arm got broke, you can model him in maybe a little sling or something like that, and you take the weapon away or whatever, you know. If he starts getting really banged up pretty hard, you can put battle damage on his armor or something. You know, like you can do all kinds of whatever you want to do. It's like the sky's the limit with mini agnostic games because you can do so much hobbying fun with them, and which I think is really, really cool.
Yeah, you can also express who you are as a hobbyist too, right? 100%. I think this game, it goes without said that the aesthetic either works or doesn't work for people, but I think something that should be said is because it's hobby open, because kind of the world is your oyster when it comes to how you want your warband to look. If you don't want to be super gross, it does not have to be super gross. You know, like it doesn't. If you don't want to be super grim dark, it does not have to be super grim dark. But additionally, too, like you can make your own faction who you are within the greater faction too, because they talk about in this game a lot the breadth of like, you know, there's actual sub factions, and then there's also kind of like Johnny, you and I played the Trench Pilgrims, like in my head of lore. Also, there's just Trench Pilgrims everywhere, right? Like they're all a little bit different, right?
100%.
They fight different fights in different trenches. And so what does that speak to you as a hobbyist? And also, what do you want to get out of the game, right? So I think there's a natural transition, if any, to talk about the lore, the aesthetic, which is a little bit intense, and also something that's a little bit out of my purview of doing podcasts for years, where the intensity of the lore, the aesthetic in particular, is very high, but at the same time, the game offers like unlimited flexibility in this too, is a good way to say it.
Yeah.
Like you don't have to go all the way gross, as we just said.
Totally. I mean, and I think that's the great thing about games that don't lock you into miniatures or, so I guess it would be, if I were to draw a parallel. So if we look at Games Workshop, right? So the elephant in the room, obviously these guys have been around forever. If you know anything about Trench Crusade, you might be here because you have enjoyed one of Games Workshop's games at some point in time. And they, back in the 90s and early 2000s, they were much heavier into the grimdark aesthetic than where they are now. Now, they've probably met better commercial success now because some of that has been removed. But if you took a Space Marines, right? You take the ubiquitous Space Marine out of 40K. There are a number of factions that exist already, you know, chapters, Space Marine chapters that exist that you could model your models after. But if you wanted to find some niche chapter of Space Marines and go and say, well, my chapter of Space Marines is going to be a sub-faction of those guys. I'm going to have my own painting thing and I can build my own lore about my dudes and stuff like that. That space still existed. A little bit harder to get into in that game space, right? But it existed. And you can look at it very much in the same way with Trench Crusade, whereas they come at you straight out the gate with a very aggressive aesthetic. And it is quintessential to some degrees the element of what the game is about, which is trench warfare, which is a war crime for a reason. There's a reason that we don't use shotguns in Trench Crusade or trenches and napalm anymore, right? Like they're the horrible things that we have done in the past of humanity. So it naturally, plus combined with that heavily religious, demonic element, there's a lot there that is very dark and aggressive and heavy. But you don't necessarily have to lean into it when it comes from a hobbying perspective. If that's too much for you, right? I was playing a game at my local shop. He's doing a demo game for a guy who had wanted to play, and he came in and he played, and he came from a very conservative background. And I have the stock stigmatic nuns that they did from the STLs, right? And one of the stigmatic nuns is topless, you know, and like partial armor and stuff, and there's like blood running down her or whatever. And he got a little uncomfortable with it. And I was like, yep, you know what? Let me just snatch that guy up, swap it out with another model. Boom, we're good. Because base size is really all that matters in the game. There has been some discussion with some of the devs. They were in an interview earlier in the year where they were saying that their first priority is to get the rule set fun, and then they're going to worry about balance and tournament quality gameplay, competitive gameplay later. And one of those discussions that they're going to have is silhouette, right? But they're saying right now, as far as modeling is concerned, yeah, sure, you can model for benefit because it's true line of sight currently still, but the size is really what is the emphasis as far as gameplay counts for now, right? It's just what that base size is. So with that, you have a lot of flexibility to do whatever you want with your model. So for instance, for me, I really enjoy the grimdark aesthetic, but from a modeling perspective, what I don't like is what I see a lot of like lack of contrast when everything is just grimy and rusty and brown.
Agreed.
And so like my trench pilgrims, for instance, their core main color is red for like their like cloth and stuff like that, with little pop accents of white, and then it's just black and brass for their armor, right? It's kind of like a darkened steel and like brass accents and stuff like that. So you have a little bit of that white, dirty white, but it's still white. A little bit of that brass that kind of flashes, and then you have the kind of corroded steel, and then the kind of like dirty reds, but it doesn't lean into the browns yet. So it still has that contrast where it steps away when I put my models down. If I'm putting them down on a muddy trench board, they will still pop out and stand a little bit visually from the rest of the stuff that is going on.
Yeah, you've made it your own, right?
Yeah,
which we've talked about at length here. My trench pilgrims, I want to do something very similar, like really just kind of lean into, as we talked about, less dirty, less grim dark, more into the churches they're trying to emulate, right? Some of the it's like some of the high art of our eras in our lifetime, right, was a lot driven by the church. And so like golds, right? Rubies, as you mentioned, like leaning those tones and kind of making them our own, but also too, like mirrors are fun too, when you do your own thing. That's something I've talked about a lot on various podcasts over the years, but when you make a list your own, it's just super fun because it's an expression of you, but also too, now you're playing a player with the same list. Okay, all of a sudden you can tell everybody's models apart, right? So that's a big part of the game. But like, I think getting back to the aesthetic more, like Mike friend China designed a lot of the art in this game, right? And so digging back in the lore of just gaming in general, like if you're familiar with the Diablo games, having a Diablo artist design art for this game was going to go one way, right? What's really interesting is like, I love the lore here because Johnny, we've touched on it a couple times, but like there's a lot of mythological things here. There's a lot of like religion based art and aesthetics and icons and iconography. And I think it's very cool, but you and I have talked about this a lot off mic too. This could be something that could maybe send someone out of the game before they even try. And I don't want people to be run out because I think there's something here for everyone in this game, especially the rule set, but especially even the aesthetic. I think something you and I've talked about a lot about this show as we've been preparing for it, and also this game, is like Diablo. Let's be honest. I think Diablo is fairly respectful of the lore of religions, the lore of mythology around the stuff. Crusade to me feels very respectful around this.
Yeah, no, I think they did a great job about it. And I think one of the things we've talked about as well is the representation that you get, right? So I love it when a thing anywhere in life kind of addresses something that is a contentious idea, right? And tries to look at it in a more palatable way and a kind of like in a more balanced way instead of like an extreme on either side, right? And I love the fact that the developers picked like the Levant area. They picked an area that historically,
for sure,
is under a lot of conflict by the same three monotheistic religions, which are represented in the game, being paired together, fighting a greater
They're
problem,
a team.
right?
I love it,
but I love that. Like, it's like, hey, we're gonna take an area that historically has been a point of conflict, and for anybody who doesn't know, basically the idea is that the temple it was like in Israel was basically the center point of these crusaders who found,
of course,
an epic icon and did this horrible blasphemous thing and opened the gates of hell, right? And so it's been consumed, right? And this area now, which was historically in our world so important and under a point of conflict, is in the center of a different kind of conflict within the game and this alternate history, which I think is really interesting to spin that tension into a fictional narrative, right? That we can look at through different lens. Whereas in this case, all of the Abrahamic religions are fighting together, right?
Love it.
Individual identities, like one of the things we were talked about before, is like the Iron Sultanate, the Great Wall of the Iron Sultanate. I think there's a total name. Is represented in here, and like you don't see a lot of Islamic representation in war games, and I love that, and it's So it's really cool, basically, that they are taking so many ideas that in our world there's tension and conflict around, and they are presenting it in a way that is very different, and is able to be approached with a very different mindset by the people who engage with it. And I love that, which again is to say that you don't have to have everything crouched in blood and gore, right? Like you can do it. Like my Sultanate that I have, they're all being painted up in like bright golds with a little bit of weathering down at the bottom, but I want them to be like a sharp conflict, or to the visual of, or contrast to the visual of the gaming table.
Oh yeah, and that the lore kind of dictates some of that too, which is very cool. Like the Iron Wall, is very cool. I want to get back to this, like all the Abrahamic religions like banding together. I think it's so unifying and so inspiring.
Mm-hmm.
But also too, it's very cool because, like you said, there's a reverence for the three religions in this game. Also too, you mentioned like not a lot of games have done even just Islam and that side of things. But let's also like go one step further. We're like, I don't know a ton of games, Johnny, that have done like this early church, Christian, early Catholic church, like iconography in this way. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
And pros and cons and all, it's all here,
Sure.
and it's very much like reverent of the era, but also, as you said, this is alt history, right? And so some things went butterfly effect another way. The Trench Pilgrims are a great example of that.
Mm-hmm.
And then other things went another way too. And it goes for all the good guys in the game. I say in quotes, right? And that's so cool because alt history is just cool. I think Johnny and I both enjoy alt history. It's why we're doing this show. But additionally too, like this is a world that did not progress the same way our world did. There's certain eras that were kind of lost, and that's also kind of fun. We're going to talk about that in lore in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
What's really cool about the game, Johnny, is we talk about like we're in the early 1900s, but really there's still a medieval aspect to it.
Yeah, it's great juxtaposition. I love it.
Yeah, so we've got like a really healthy medieval aspect, a really trench warfare aspect, and then we got all this like mythological and based in religious texts aspect, which we love to see. And so this is something that's been going on since like the beginning of a religious text, where we've been getting like fiction, mythology, lore. I think of Dante's Inferno around this stuff that is not part of the religious text, but it's an extension and a fun kind of like next level. And like this game is that, but like what's cool about it is you don't have to dig into any of that or care about any of that to enjoy the game. The game is so solid and so fun that I don't think you need that. But for us, me and Johnny being big history buffs and having like, history in some of these elements of this game, it's super fun for us. Like for me, like the Diablo history kind of like comes back here,
Sure.
Like, okay, this is really fun. I'm a D&D player. I'm a Diablo player. I'm a miniatures war gamer. And I also have like a deep love of like Dante's Inferno and like these religious texts. And like, okay, this is made for me,
Yeah. It's a parallel.
I got to figure out which path is my path, but this is made for me,
Yeah, for sure.
So I dig that. And so I'm excited to get in this journey with you more. So I think what we should talk about next is like some of our history with podcasting, creating content, and playing games as players, and like how that might translate to this show, Saints and Sevens.
Yeah, for sure. So for me, I guess I'll go first on that piece. I was deeply involved in the creator space back in the late 2000s and early 2000s and teens for over a decade, where I had podcasts back then, and I wrote and I did some work, published some game content, things like that. Then took a pretty long break from it, and recently, just last year, got back into the space. I have another podcast, You're Such a Nerd, which is a geek culture podcast, and it's kind of more of like a variety show. It's not really specific to any sort of one game content, but I've been playing games since the 80s. Like I was still in my single digits, I think, when I got my hands on Hero Quest and my first introduction to Dungeons and Dragons. And I've been in it since my first war game was actually BattleTech in the 90s when FASA still owned it. And that's when I got introduced. And I had already gotten miniatures because I was just into medieval stuff. Like I used to go to the library and I would get like the books from the library about medieval weapons and culture and stuff. I tried making my own games when I was like 14, try to figure stuff out. And before I knew what polyhedral dice were. And yeah, so I started playing war games back in the 90s with BattleTech, and when the miniatures were complete garbage, and they're much better now. And found my way into other games. Warhammer, eventually Warhammer Fantasy in the 90s was a big game for me for a long time. That's how I got introduced to army level games and rank and flank, this like the square bases. which moved into, like 40K into the early 2000s. And I played a bunch of other tertiary games, obviously role playing this whole time. And then probably mid 2000 teens, I started really branching out a lot into other kinds of gaming. And I think one of the things, and I've played a lot of different games over the years. I mean, we both, play Marvel Crisis Protocol. I've dipped my toe in the Shatterpoint space, just to really have a space where I was at, or a community where I was at, to really get that game going. A lot of love. I love a lot of if you're supposed to say off meta games, I guess, independent stuff, Gaslands, Acropolis, Bushido, those kinds of games. But the thing that that drew me to Trench Crusade was twofold. One, I mentioned previously a little bit about the rule set, because the rule set is so wildly accessible. And because the game is so framed around narrative, which so many games, that is not like essential to the gameplay or quintessential to it, like really connected and tied in, like the game's written with the idea of being a narrative game.
Yeah, of course.
The rule set really reflects that, and the ability that, and this is one of the things I love about it, is that the biggest, baddest bad guy can be brought down by rolling a 12 by the lowliest dude with a dagger.
We
So
love
like
that.
it has these moments of just like everyone's like throwing dice and screaming because the incredible thing that it statistically shouldn't happen just happened, which is really, really great. And that's what really drew me to Trench Crusade, and really got me wanting to be a part of developing that community and establishing it. Because I looked at it and I said, hey, this aesthetic might not initially on first look be for everyone, especially with some of the very preliminary stuff that they did. And they kind of dialed it back a little bit, which I think is good for the game. But the gameplay, the narrative style, and the fact that it's a game that's focused on a campaign gameplay that has gotten as much exposure as it did, because there are other games out there that are like that, just don't have the exposure that Trench Crusade did. It was a massive Kickstarter, right?
Oh,
So it got
crazy.
a lot of attention. And with the names that are involved in it as developers, like obviously it was going to get, some attention. And I that's what got me sold on the game as soon as I saw it.
All very valid, and like also what make Trench Crusade so unique, right? Like we keep talking about all these unique factors, and I think there's more to talk about, but those are some of the ones that really kind of hooked me in too. And I think a big part of my story is this is an exciting endeavor for me as someone who's been doing podcasts over 11 years consistently, and also doing content before that. Like Johnny mentioned, like me and Johnny were in similar spaces around the similar time. I was doing blog related content, music related content, movies, music, nerd culture stuff. Then I got into the hobby aspect of creating podcasts for miniatures gaming, and I've been hit with that bug since. And I've been doing a lot of shows since then.
Man, you got the full virus. It's not a bug.
Yeah, I think so. So it started with some of the early FFG Star Wars games, kind of bled into Star Wars lore, really had some successful shows there. And then since then, it's been a lot of the shows that I've had that are currently still running. Furious Finest about everything Marvel Crisis Protocol in the Marvel Universe, and my newer shows, Hello There, everything about Star Wars Shatterpoint and Star Wars Legion, Star Wars Universe, and Truth and Reconciliation about the Halo universe. And so what's really refreshing to me, Johnny, about this show, number one, it's way out of my purview. Number two, there's a lot of elements of the miniature game puzzle that are kind of removed, as you mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
Number one, a generic guy can just take on anybody, but also number two, the most important part, the narrative aspect is kind of tier one before tier two of anything else. The next part two, which I think should be very obvious to any listeners that listen to me for years, but is obviously IP removed despite having its own IP.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's safe to say.
Yep.
And so someone who's been so deeply in Star Wars lore and Marvel lore for over a decade and doing this on the regular, I'm very excited to learn a new universe, dig more in, like we said, kind of expand that like Diablo background going forward, bring in some of the literature of older games, older books, older texts that kind of influence this game, in a lot of ways, and see the threads, right? See the threads of like we said, like Dante's Inferno, like just all these things through history that obviously inspired this game in different ways. Mm-hmm. But this game is not fully established from a lore perspective yet. And we want to be kind of on the forefront of that. We kind of want to teach you guys about it as we learn about it. I think is a big part to say on this. I think it's a very exciting space because I think this game, Johnny, is very much more enjoyable when you know the lore better and you create your own lore stories with your own warband and your own campaign with your friends.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's one of the things that's been great about the progression of the game so far in just the last year that it's been around is the support that the company has given towards people who appropriately acquire the license to do so, but
Yeah.
create their own sub factions within the like the Red Brigade was the first one where the company came to the guys over at Trench Crusade and, hey, look, we got this idea. Would you guys be willing to put a rule set together for it? And they're like, absolutely, let's do it, right? And
So cool.
that was the birth of the sub factions that started happening. And that's another thing that I think is so unique about this game over other games is that while the core rule set is the same, like it applies the same to everyone. Everyone has access to effectively the same battle kit. There's not a lot of crazy variation there. The factions and the sub factions make everything feel wildly unique. So if you're playing the Black Grail versus the Sultanate, those feel very different. If you're playing the Red Brigade, for instance, or Naval Raiders against Heretic Legion, like that feels completely different. They all feel wildly unique in their gameplay. And I think that's what's really cool about it is that allows you to experience something very different without having to learn a whole book full of rules or whatever the case is, right?
I see what you mean. Yeah, totally. Like the rule set is so simple, intuitive, and strong. And then you kind of add the asymmetry of the factions, which is, if anyone's been listening to me for years, that's one of my love languages in miniatures and also board gaming. Like I really gravitate towards the asymmetrical board games. To me, that not only speaks about replayability and fun, but also like lore. Like if my faction is really, really good at one thing or two things or three things, but your faction is not, and your faction's the flip on the other side. Even if we're playing a board game, like that really is my forte over board games where everybody has the exact same tools, right? And that's just a personal preference. And so for Trench Crusade to have that baked into the rules, I think is super cool, super relevant too, because the factions, Johnny, I think it's safe to say, are like the lifeblood of the game, like 100%. What the rules really are, right? Like the factions are so different from a flavor perspective and also a gameplay perspective that I can't wait to dive in more. There's so many factions I haven't even dug into the rules or played yet that I want to dig into more. And this show's going to help me do that.
Yeah, and we'll get into those. I think that's a great opportunity that we have here. And anyone who's just coming into Trench Crusade is that what you said very early when we first started, right? Like, so I've been had my hands at the game since it first came out and was accessible to the public. You've kind of just come into it with new, so there's going to be this like learning process that we're going to be able to help people through,
of course,
and share with them as we go through it. And to your asymmetry piece, something else that I really love about the game that you don't typically see in a lot of war games is maybe half of their scenarios that you play are asymmetrical scenarios. So love you may both come with, I don't know, 1,000 ducats of warband, right? But then you roll off, and depending on where you are and what your role is in the scenario, you may only start with 2/3 of your warband. And it's not the other ones aren't coming as reinforcements. You're literally just starting with 2/3 of your warband or something like that, right? And it all balances out, right? It's not like, that feels
good stuff. Kind of
thing. Yeah, it's all good. Yeah. It's all good for the narrative piece. But it's just that like they're not afraid to lean into the narrative of saying like, hey, let's build asymmetrical combat into it. Let's build factions that kind of just do one thing really well and stink at this other thing, right? Because it creates more flavor. Now, correlatively, much more difficult, arguably, to balance. But thankfully, with the rule set being the way it is not that bad of an experience. Because I'm trying to think of, so we just did a campaign in my local shop. I ran one for 6 weeks, and Black Grail had just dropped when they first came out. And everyone was like, Black Grail busted. These guys are going to come in and they're just going to smoke everyone, kind of a thing, right? And one of the guys had got a hold of like a meta list or something like that for the Court of the Seven-Headed Serpent and tried it. And I was actually his opponent on that one. And sure, there was like one model that was extremely difficult to kill, or to get out of the game. But in being able to maximize your activations and use your resources the right way, make good player decisions, right, wasn't a problem. And I don't think I ever killed that guy, but I tabled, I think, the rest of the models or something like that. Like it was the one guy I couldn't hysterically kill. But to that point is like, it's, even though it's asymmetrical and there's inequality necessarily on pages, it's pretty easy to work against. And they do a great job. They're doing quarterly updates for right now. They agreed to drop a new one just this month in April as we're recording this. That's going to be coming out. And then we're going to be starting our second campaign, our narrative campaign at my local shop after that drops, because they're bringing in some new scenarios supposedly as well. And it does bring up the conversation about competition, right? You've played at a very high competitive level in many games. You're just playing at the Worlds at Adepticon.
Right. That's true. That's true.
I don't play at high levels of competition, just because that's not something I've ever pursued. And maybe over the next year or two, I might decide to dip my toe in that space.
It's something I've fallen into, Johnny. It's not something I've, aggressively pursued, but it's just,
It didn't just naturally call to you. You weren't born into the competition.
no, but, I grew up in a very competitive area here and, some guys that were really great and iron sharpens iron, right? And so that's a big part of it, right? So at the end of the day, I still, unfortunately, my biggest Achilles heel as a competitive player is I'm going to play what I want to play.
Yes.
I'm going to play what brings me joy on the table, even if it's not correct.
100%.
That's usually
me.
What I do. So luckily I'm a pretty good miniatures gamer, but that can only take you so far. But, I have been to a lot of Worlds tournaments for a lot of games and had a great time.
No. Yeah. It will be interesting what they do with this game because the UK had a tournament while it was still in beta, right?
Okay. Yeah.
Right before I think the official 1.0 dropped, if I'm not mistaken, or it was maybe taking place like the weekend of the 1.0 drop, something along those lines. It was a close proximity to before the official play rules actually came out. And I remember thinking at the time, how is anybody running a tournament for this game? Like, this game does not seem remotely balanced for competition. And then fast forward a few months, they had the interview with the devs, and they're like, yeah, we're looking at a competitive development of it. And the question that they brought up initially was like, we have to look at, are we going to go to silhouettes versus true line of sight? Because that's going to be the number one deciding factor, for a competitive game is you have to solidify some sort of line of sight resolution. And they were discussing whether they're going to go to kind of more of like an Infinity style silhouette model, or Halo has that same thing where it's the silhouette of the base. It's not an actual model itself that matters, that kind of a thing. But they're like, first off, we want to make sure the game's fun and everyone's enjoying the narrative, and we'll cycle back to that. And they're going to make that decision later if they're going to make it hyper competitive. People have still been running tournaments, which I find interesting. The thing that I question on that space currently as it sits right now is because of the massive swing ability of the core rolling and wounding mechanism in the game. I question how much that will lend itself to hyper competitive gameplay. That doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. And I personally envision, and I think you can talk a little bit because you just came back from Adepticon about what they were doing there. But everything I've seen so far has been like narrative competition, which I think is an interesting twist on the competitive environment versus just a typical Swiss competition style,
Yeah, I also think too, like, if narrative's so baked into the game, like, why not kind of try to work it in to,
for sure,
to competitive? I walked through those rooms. It was so cool to see so many things happening at Adepticon, Johnny, for this game. We had the competitive. We also had the narrative event, which was themed terrain-wise around the narrative event. I want more space for that, right? And so I hope that continues that way. But like you said, it's kind of a moving target in the sense of, how do you lock a game down that way, right? But it seems like they're moving that direction, which is very cool. And, at the end of the day, I mean, you and I have played the game. You've played it a lot more than me. Do you think anything is like wildly out of balance?
I think
aggressively so.
No, I would say no. But I also, I don't have the super sweats in me, right? And I'm acknowledging that the core mechanism of the game is inherently high fluctuation, high variance, right? But that's what lends itself to good narrative play, I believe. Just like the campaign system, there's high variance because there's dice rolls and things like that involved with it. So if that's going to be part of your competition, it's going to lend a high variance into the swing of the outcomes. There are models that are definitely tar pit models, and those units that are, wow, I don't want that thing to get anywhere near me. But it's pretty correlative to what you're paying for them. Now, I foresee a day where the Anchorite Shrine with an Ecclesiarch prisoner broken on the wheel costs more than it does, because, boy, that guy can not die sometimes. Because you gotta get through tough like 3 times to kill this dude at that point. Like, it is, you got to drop him quite a few times before it's gonna go down. So that's a model that I have only ever lost once in any of my games I've ever played. One game that I did not use a prisoner on the wheel to do it. So I
never again.
Yeah, exactly. I'll never do that again. So I think there are models like that are just going to be like your big centerpiece, tar pit models. And there are certainly some min-maxing that you can do with some of the battle kit to really maximize your output. Grenades were kind of busted and before the last update, and they changed that, which is going to kind of, I think, reduce the grenade spam you were seeing, because at one point grenades were better than shooting, so which was kind of just a mistake on, I think the devs part when they initially designed it. But
natural progression for any game, right?
100%. And I think that's the thing that people need to remember, right? This game is wildly in its infancy. I mean, we are, I don't, it's been 6 months yet since 1.0 came out? I don't know. And they've already up to like 1.02, right? They've already been updating the core rule set multiple times since it first came out already. They're doing patches. We've got a new one coming out like just around the corner. So at this point in my experience, and I've played, I think, against every faction that's out there, there's nothing that is wildly broken. There are definitely things where I'm like, I do not want to touch that guy. Let me run around the other side of the board. But gameplay can allow that, or it's like I definitely deployed the wrong way and now I need to get my anchorite or my communicate or my, whatever over on that side of the board to go handle that guy, because he's just going to cut through anything that he touches,
Well, a natural transition, if any, Johnny, is talking about factions that kind of have our eye, or ones that you've been playing a lot already in the game. I think it'd be remiss if we didn't talk about the 6 main factions really quickly to the listener and kind of talk about ones that kind of have our eye before we transition into the back half of the episode where we talk about goals with this show.
For sure. So straight up, you got New Antioch, which is really cool. They're basically the conglomeration of all the peoples in the world is kind of the idea. They've all come to this mega city called New Antioch because the old Antioch was destroyed. And they are, their specialty is kind of powered armored infantry. They have kind of that typical World War II aesthetic you might see if you're a Games Workshop 40K guy, the Death Corps of Krieg, that kind of a stuff, gas masks, that kind of vibe. And they have a number of sub-factions. I think actually New Antioch has the most sub-factions currently that are out there under them. If you continue on along the good guys, you're going to look at the, what everyone calls the Iron Sultanate, which it's a much longer name than that I always forget the official name of. And they are the like alchemical wizards, if you will. They've got some really cool centerpiece models like the Brazen Bull and the Lion of Jabir, which are really rad. Their aesthetics are super cool. They have like alchemical weapons that they can do and stuff like that. And then you got the Trench Pilgrims, which so I have Iron Sultanate. I basically have all the factions. I have a buddy of mine who is very gracious with his printer and helped me out. So I basically have all the factions, but my order of priority was Trench Pilgrims first, Sultanate second for the good guys. And the Trench Pilgrims they're the peasants. I don't know what to call them. They're effectively, right? Like they're just down in the muck.
Yeah, they're the guerrilla troops, right? Like the guerrilla warfare troops. Like in my Star Wars terms, for the Star Wars listeners out there, which I don't know how many there are. If New Antioch's like the main like cohesive rebel alliance, the Trench Pilgrims are like Saw Gerrera's rebels. Like
yes, exactly. That's a great correlation.
Partisans, So they don't play by any rules. They're just out there to kill some Imperials. In this case, kill some demons, some bad guys, and they're going to stop at nothing. They're just going to keep, some chaotic good, I suppose.
Yeah, and they've got some pretty cool sub factions as well that you're able to do.
True.
Some pretty neat variants where they have one that you can field to the Anchorite Shrines, which is really rad.
Oh yeah.
The Order of Methodius, I think, is that one. And a few other ones, some that can't even take stigmatic nuns, but they can take other things. Some that don't take the communicates because they're like purists, like almost like inquisitors or witch hunters and stuff like that. They believe that it's wrong. So they make it for other ways. So it's really cool. And then on the the fallen side, if you call those the faithful and the fallen, what I would say is probably the primary one that most people see, which is Court of the Seven-Headed Serpent. This is, of course, super big demons. This is like my number one on my fallen side for my war bands. Really crazy big honking models. They have a really interesting rule set where we'll get into what blood markers are and those things, but they basically use them to cast spells and all that kinds of stuff. It's really, really cool. Then you have the Black Grail. The Black Grail is effectively, if you're a 40K familiar, it's Nurgle. Essentially, it's that body horror, it's the infection, it's that kind of thing. And they have a whole unique mechanism in their gameplay. And then you have the Heretic Legion, which is basically if you took, I don't know, New Antioch and made them fallen effectively, right? It's your kind of
Yeah.
main line, the humans and the people that are a piece of that, and that's my secondary one that I'm doing on the fallen side.
Yeah, and the lore there is that they are the people who have actively chosen to fully fall in with the demons, right? We've talked about this off mic a lot. The lore is so fascinating, like where
Yes.
people fall on the good and bad side. But I would, in my brain of my personal hierarchy, I put the heretics pretty high on the dark side list, Johnny, on the sense of they're men and women who have actively given their souls and bodies away.
And we'll get into it on the lore section, but
To
there's
the demons, yeah.
there's some interesting like subtleties to that faction when it comes to a lore piece, you know, of people who are just
Cool.
kind of like, hey, it's you can't find them, join them, kind of a deal. So,
Yep.
yeah, so who are you looking at?
Well, Johnny and I have a lot of the same factions aligned, which is really funny and something we talked about a lot. But
We didn't mean
the
this.
Trench Pilgrims are very cool to me. If you see that Anchorite Shrine and it does make you feel something, I mean, good or bad,
sure.
like that is a colossus of a model. Quite literally, it's a colossus church mech, right? And that is a very cool aesthetic to me. But also, I think that speaks to the core of Trench Crusade, which is acknowledging and revering the history of our world, acknowledging and kind of revering the history of mythology, and then also kind of forging your own path. Like I said, the more the Diablo story here, like it's just, oh, let's have fun with it. That thing is crazy. I mean, so seeing that piece, I was like, well, I got to play that faction. I think New Antioch also interests me in the sense of I've seen a lot of cool hobbying done in regards to technically New Antioch is all of humanity. There's vestiges of humanity everywhere, different cultures with their power armor, their priests, their snipers. That's cool. I've seen a lot of cool expression of that. But I think for me, it's for Faithful, it's the Trench Pilgrims because the play style is also very melee focused, which seems like a ton of fun. They can be swarmy if they want to, which I also really dig, but they've got a couple core pieces. And I just can't not quit those stigmatic nuns, Johnny. Like,
they're sick.
You know,
I love them.
Aesthetic,
I love nuns.
lore, play style. After I dug into their rules, like learn how fast they are, learn how efficient they are. How could I choose anything else? So that's the faction that's got my eye. But Iron Sultanate also has my eye. I love magey type stuff in games. I love the Middle Eastern aesthetic and like the expression of hobby there is a lot higher, as you mentioned. That Brazen Bull also one of the best models in the game. I think that in the Anchorite Shrine, if they don't speak to you in some way, like, you know, like I think that's the appeal of those factions. But then on the Fallen side, I'm not a huge dark side Fallen type player, but from a playstyle perspective, in particular, the Court of the Seven really have my eye. I told Johnny they're probably my first like really truly deep dive in the game just because they are so complex. I feel like I'm going to learn so much about the game and kind of the ability to play the game well, I think is best expressed in that faction.
And you're a control player too in a lot of ways, your other games, I would say. So that's not surprising because they definitely have that kind of element to them.
And they're also like a tall faction, right? I'd say in miniatures gaming terms, but I mean, they have very elite pieces that they have less actions overall, but their actions have higher impact, like you said, big spells. And then, you know, like what's not to love about the flexibility of the hobby aspect of that faction as well. Like you get the official STLs, but also too, like there's been some sick over the years, just like Fallen Angels and stuff over different game systems and video games, right? Like that could really translate well to that faction. So that's the one that has my eye the most. You know, I'm not a Nurgle interest or player at all. So I think that aspect is just lost for me. But I think the Heretics, despite me having some, you know, some icky feelings with some of the lore, I've seen some people that also felt the same way kind of make their own Heretics that kind of just fits better and like what they wanted also. Because I think the Heretics do have a really cool rule set. And I think they're a really cool play style. And you cannot knock the mascot of the game, which is the witch, right? I mean,
talk about somebody who's going to murder you. It's going to be an artillery witch.
The artillery witch. Yeah. Also, like, as one of the coolest miniatures of the game, seeing her statue at Adepticon in person.
Oh, I bet.
Super amazing, right? Like, there was an artillery witch cosplay person there as well.
Sick.
They were getting pictures next to the witch statue. I mean, come on. You can't beat it, right? So, I mean, as much as I don't want to play them in an RP sense, I got to admit how cool their miniatures are.
Mindworks, I think it's Mindworks. They have a bust of the artillery witch.
Oh my god,
Like
I
an
saw
artist
that.
collects like
Yeah,
a big like 75 mil or whatever that I am wildly tempted to get and paint at some point in time. It's so cool just to put it on my shelf and look at it. But to your point about the Black Grail, also, if that aesthetic is your vibe,
oh yeah,
because I have a number of friends who really dig the kind of the body horror, the Nurgle kind
for
of
sure.
aesthetic and stuff like that. Man, it is incredible for that vibe, right? If that for that aesthetic, it is what I think everyone wishes Games Workshop was doing with that Nurgle space. They did
Not the
it extremely
cartoony.
well. Yeah, it's not cartoony at all. It is very disgusting, and they did a great job with it. So if you like that
It's
thing, it's going to be your vibe.
it's full Cronenberg, right? If you want that in your life,
Hmm.
like you can lean into that. You can get it. What's fun to me too in the game, something we talked about this episode a couple times already, Johnny. That faction doesn't speak to me. That faction is not for me. But I'm totally down being like some faithful people, like holding the line against those
Oh yeah.
zombies,
Hmm.
against those body horror,
Yeah.
So it can still work even if it's not for you.
Totally. Yeah.
So
That's the great thing about the game. It is open to the expression of how you want to engage with it, right? And you're able to tell some really cool stories. So it appeals both to the like RPG side of me and to the miniature wargaming side of me,
oh, absolutely.
and I really like dig that.
Well, and I think that's a bigger sell than anything. Like if you've been listening to this episode and you haven't played the game or haven't even seen it, are you an RPG player? Because I think there's a level of this rule set and the game itself and the lore, which we're going to cover on the show, that speak extra to the RPG player.
Hmm.
And I think what's really cool is like if you're a miniatures war gamer like we are and we have been for decades, this is just a really good tight rule set. It's just a great game.
So, yeah, it's great.
But if you're interested in like the RPG element, and then additionally too, if you've got like any sort of connection to any of this aesthetic or lore, like me and Johnny do, like we've been talking about, and we'll talk about more on the show, a deeper dive, like this is the game for you. Like it's really exciting. And I think for me too, Johnny, we talked about like my history in other games, and I played so many games. This is such a different flavor of game. And I know even for you too, you've played games more like this, like even games you currently play.
Hmm.
This game is such a different flavor. Like I think saying it's just another miniatures game in my purview of miniatures games is kind of selling it a little bit short. I
Oh,
think it's
absolutely.
fair to say.
Yeah.
And I don't really know how we can convey that via audio to the listener, but it's an experience, right? And I think,
Yeah.
it's like sometimes D&D is not deep enough from a miniature perspective. Maybe there's the other side of that coin. You know what I mean? Like you're getting the full lore, but you're also getting a miniatures experience too, where you're building this terrain you're really proud of, and you're kind of guiding your players around a really unique story, or you're one of the players in someone's story, like on top of it being a good, tight miniature system.
Yeah, Jesse, you bring up a good point about that, about the potential appeal to role players. Like I hadn't really thought through that in its entirety, but it's really accurate because if you look at a lot of miniature war games, they don't typically have enough of customization or narrative impact, I think, to be a bridge game for people who are in RPGs and haven't really
No.
touched miniature war gaming. Like I think about, I love Marvel Crisis Protocol. It's a great game, but most people who are in RPGs are not going to look at that and be like, oh, I feel like I'm playing Wolverine and the Hulk and whatever, right? Like it just doesn't connect as well, because it's
Right.
there's chits on the board and I'm kind of moving my dudes doing these things, right? And don't get me wrong, great game. I'm not knocking MCP at all. I love the game. But from an RPG gateway perspective into miniature war gaming, probably not going to be a huge draw for a lot of people. But if you look at the stereotypical role players, which are the majority of people who are in some way, most of the games, not all of them obviously, are touching on either alt history or fantasy, medieval type of stuff. This game lands in that perfect spot because, as you said, it's got the medieval fantasy trappings, right? It's got the very clear good versus evil kind of
Love it.
framework.
Yeah.
And it's also set in a semi-modern setting too. So, like if I want the person to run around with a flail and an axe, or if I want someone to run around with a shotgun, it can all work together in the same space. And lore-wise, they've written it in a very cohesive manner that it doesn't feel out of place in any way, shape, or form. And it can be a great bridge game if you've got buddies that are into RPGs and you're a weekly RPG night and they've never gotten into miniature wargaming and you've tried. This might be a good way to get them into it, actually.
Oh, absolutely, because of all the RPG elements, but also too something we've been harping on a lot this episode, like the simplicity of the rules. And like we're not going through the rules this episode, Johnny, but if you were to like quickly explain the rules to a new player or a player who's maybe interested in the game, I mean, it's very straightforward. And I don't know if you can guide us through that really quickly.
Yeah, I mean it's very simple in the sense of you want to roll a 7 or you want to roll a 12. There's a couple other
Yeah.
things you need to know in there, but basically it's it, right? 7 is your success. 12 basically means you worked whatever you're fighting. You know.
And technically, you don't have a cap on your actions like a lot of miniatures game, right? Like a lot of miniatures games, like I get 2 actions. What's your choice? Like this game's a little bit unique in the sense of you get a lot of access to a lot of actions depending on the type of unit you are, and you can do all those during your turn, and then your turn ends, right? And different units get less or more actions.
Yeah, you basically just can't duplicate the same action is really the only
Of
restriction that
course.
kind of comes into play, which does create tactical decision making between like moving and charging because those things are categorized as kind of the same thing. There's a risky action. Certain actions, basically, you have to roll to see if you succeed, and if you fail, there's a consequence. And there is in all factions something called a blood marker, which is basically a resource that you're able to manage to impact rolls that you make or that your opponent makes. And that's, I mean, that's the bulk of the game right there. And it's
It's pretty much
impacted.
most of it.
Yeah, there's modifiers that come and go, but they're pretty minimal. The only thing that I think is remotely confusing about the rule set for anyone who comes from traditional wargaming is that you're building a dice pool. So it's a dice pool game versus just rolling, say, 1 dice, 2 dice, 3 dice. So what you do is all stats on all rolls are on a 2 to 12, right? So you start with those 2 dice. Every roll is always made with a minimum of 2 dice. And then based on circumstances, armor, whatever things that come into play, there is a plus dice and a minus dice that will get added. Now, what that physically means is you're taking another 6-sided dice and you're putting it into the pool. If it's a minus dice, you roll all of those dice together, you take the 2 lowest numbers. If it's a plus dice, you roll all those dice together, you take the 2 highest. It's kind of like advantage and disadvantage in Dungeons and Dragons in 5th edition. So it's kind of similar in that area. And that's like the only thing that people kind of you get a little tripped up in, because if you have a situation where there's a negative dice and a positive dice being put in, okay, well, those cancel each other out. You just still roll in 2d12 and taking it, right? So it's extremely simple. But what's beautiful about that is it allows for that epic narrative swing of my favorite story. I was playing my buddy Max. He's playing Red Brigade. I'm playing Trench Pilgrims. My massive shrine, my walking chapel, my anchorite had just downed his lieutenant, which, if you know about the dual auto pistol wielding lieutenant with the Red Brigade, is a little murder factory. So I downed him. I downed his yeoman, which is just like his little dude, you know, like beforehand, and his second weapon, smacked the other guy down, killed him. And my turns over, and I'm thinking, I go roll into the next round. I have priority. I go first. Do I want to go with my anchorite and like crush this guy and then walk away? I'm like, nah, he'll be fine. No worries. I go about my business on another model. My buddy Max activates his yeoman. His yeoman literally stands up with a dagger, rolls a 12, just murks my anchorite right then and there, dead. And I'm like screaming at the top of my lungs, like, oh my God. I love this game. That's when I fell in love with Trench Crusade, was when that happened. So
it's incredible.
Yeah, it's great. It's a great game.
Your most elite model was taken out by
the
not only
low.
the lowest of a low, but a guy that was downed, right?
Yeah.
And stood back up. And,
Yeah.
You know, it was not a great turn for that guy, and he made it work, you know?
Yeah,
so it's pretty cool. It's pretty cool.
Good game. If we haven't told you on it yet, I don't know what's going to. Play the game.
Let's be honest. Like, I know that doesn't have a lot of our miniatures game, but like that is warfare too. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like,
100%.
I mean, something, you know, I was talking about with a friend off mic where, you know, stray random bouncing bullets killed generals in the Civil War. You know what I mean? Like they were not aimed at them. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So why can't the little guy with the dagger kill the giant colossus? You know, church mech, right? And he did. So very cool.
It goes back to that correlation in D&D and role playing games, right? You get that critical success,
the RP player,
whatever it is, right? Like you get to pull off the thing. So yeah, that's great.
It's pretty cool. So we've been vamping and talking about how much we love Trench Crusade and how much we're excited to get more into it. But now we got to close out the show, Johnny, and talk about what we intend to do on this show and everything else we do around this show and this community.
And we're going to be looking at, obviously, the gameplay itself, right? We're going to delve into that. We're going to hit the lore. We're not going to be a lore-only podcast, but we are going to cover the lore of the factions, the world setting, that kind of stuff, either sub-factions. So you kind of know what flavor you're getting with those guys and whoever you go to play. We're going to look at, you know, campaign play. We're going to look at competitive play. We'll look at all of those aspects of it. We'll do a breakdown of battle kits. So we'll get into the sweats if you want to get into that. We'll walk you through the narrative aspects of the game. Look at those core game mechanisms and how it all ties up. But we also wanted to touch on the aesthetic of the game as well, and talk about things maybe that aren't just Trench Crusade specific, but maybe things that kind of touch on that aesthetic. And that may take the form of music, it may take the form of movies, or whatever the case may be, art, that we talk about. And then, we're obviously going to touch on the hobby aspect of it as well as we go along.
For sure. And I think if you've followed any of Johnny and I's content or podcasts over the years, you've kind of hopefully picked up on something that we like to lay down, which is I always want to enhance people's experience in their hobbies, Johnny, in any way I can.
Mm-hmm.
And a big part of that is how can we engage with the game when we're away from the game? And also, how can we expand our mind and our breadth on the game, right? And so I feel like if you know more about the Anchorite Shrine, you're going to enjoy it more when you play it on the table, right?
Oh, for sure.
So my intention is as a host here and also as, a speaker here is to hopefully paint that picture from a lore perspective, but also too, like, if you guys really like lore, we're going to dig more into it, right? So like we want to do these big overarching passes of the units and the factions, of course. That's gonna be a great amount of lore. But if you guys want more, like Trench Crusade is one of those worlds, like we said, it's kind of a new space for me, especially Johnny, where the IP is a little bit more open.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of like dates and moments and things that happen, but there's a lot of multiple steps along the way between those things that kind of were open to the players and also just the readers. And there's just a lot of expression of the lore in the game that I think we could explore. But also too, we want to make you enjoy the game to the highest level. And so hopefully by doing all these categories, you're gonna be able to engage with the game, enjoy it, express how it works for you, and just kind of always be plugged in when you want to be plugged in.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that, last thing is that we also want to make sure that we're contributing to a super positive community about the game, right? Because there is lots of experiences different people have, out there in the gaming environment and world. And we want to be a piece of something positive and give it back to the community and helping build that. That's a place that's accepting and allows everyone. And, there's opportunities down the road. There's a pretty decent TTS mod that's out there, that we can potentially get some online stuff going and help build the community that way as well. So there's lots of stuff out there that we'll look forward to in the future. That will be TBD.
That's right. Well, also too, I mean, Johnny and I have been part of some really cool communities over the years, and I would like to continue that trend. And so, at worst, we're going to do all the things we talked about on this podcast, but at best, we're going to do all that and hopefully build our own community around the game, but also hopefully by expanding the breadth of the greater community of this game too. And hopefully just bringing positivity every episode into your life around the game and just gaming in general, right? Like, as you said, Johnny, you and I might be talking some random record some week, right? And maybe it might not be for you. It might be, it might be during your next Trench Crusade game, you play this album, right? Or something like that. But either way, we want to approach it with a very, joyful, positive, just outlook and just hopefully bring something positive in your life. Something I've talked about a lot, Johnny, over the years doing this stuff is my greatest pleasure as a creator is to hopefully create positive things, put them out in the world and just let people do what they want with it, and that's kind of what I want to do here in full extent. And so if you guys have been with me at all over the years, that's what I want to do and no different here.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think always reminding it at the core, right? Like the purpose of what we're doing, have the opportunity to do a podcast, to talk to people about a game,
That's right.
That's about at its core, engaging with another human being. Maybe it's not across the table because maybe you don't have that option. Maybe it's got to be, to a new friend you made in another time zone somewhere else in the world on TTS or something like that. But you're playing a game that you enjoy with another human being, right? And to help foster that space and an opportunity to get people to engage more with other human beings and have a good time and create their own stories, right? My best friend from when I was a kid who's still in my life, 30 plus years later, we still get together. We talk about the movies we watched growing up and the D&D games we played and the characters that did ridiculous things. And that's what's beautiful about a game like this that is so rooted in narrative is you have an opportunity to tell those stories and to build those stories with the people across you. And I think that's the best expression of success that a game can have. So,
oh, for sure. And I think it wouldn't be hard for people to imagine, let's say they've never played in a Trench Crusade league, like you're talking about, Johnny. But I think a lot of us have played in miniatures gaming leagues and or D&D RP related things over the years, right? Imagine mashing those together, right?
Yeah.
Imagine the stories you have just playing like an 8-week Star Wars Legion League, right? With your friends. Like, imagine the stories come from that. Imagine playing like a year-long campaign of D&D. Okay, if you could kind of push these things together, what sort of like camaraderie and just joy are you going to experience with your, fellow man or woman right across the table from you?
Mm-hmm.
Sky's kind of the limit, right? And so we want just to hopefully open more doors and add to that. And I think this is a really cool game to do so, Johnny. And what's really cool is the game continues to grow, evolve, and change every week. Like you and I have been talking about doing this podcast for a long time. We've been working on this podcast many months behind the scenes, and the game has changed dramatically since we started this process too. And I think it's really fun to talk about, candidly here with the listeners, that it's been really cool to see the game continue to trend upward even since we started these talks.
Absolutely. I'm excited for what the future is going to bring for us and for the podcast and the community that as a whole. It's going to be a good time.
Yeah, so we'd love you guys to join us on this journey. So the best way you can do that is just follow this feed, follow this space. We will mention straight up right out the gate, we are launching with a Discord and a Patreon because we want this to be a very serious thing. We want to make this the highest quality we can with high production and just at the level we want to put out to you guys. So if you want to help us do that, then I want to do that is support us on the Patreon, which we're going to link in the show notes below, but just patreon.com/saints and sevens. And I think it's important to note, Johnny, that'll get you instant access to the Discord and everything we want to do there. But additionally, too, we're going to do a bunch of extra content on the Patreon, too. So this is just the beginning. We're not going to dive deep into all that right now, but you can expect bonus episodes, bonus content, and, of course, access to the Discord the second you jump in the Patreon.
That's right. Spread the word about the show, guys. Hit the like, the subscribe, the rate, the review, do all that kinds of stuff that you do. Find us and follow us on whatever podcast platform is of your choice. We'll be around.
Goodness, yes.
We're looking forward to catching up and seeing you at the next one.
Yeah, we can't wait to see you guys at the next episode. And of course, like if you want to engage with me and Johnny online, you can find us on Discord. It's pretty straightforward. Mine's just my name, Jesse Aiken. That's JESSEEAKIN. And Johnny, I know yours is the real Johnny 5
with a period.
With a period.
With a period.
So,
the only one.
You're the only one with the period, which is very important. Like you're the OG here. Johnny, where can people find you outside of Trench Crusade in regards to the podcast space?
Yeah, the podcast space, you can find me on my other show, You're Such a Nerd. It's the Definitive Greek Culture podcast. I mentioned it earlier. It's everywhere that you listen to your podcast. You'll be able to find it. And what about you, Jesse? Yeah, you got a few on your side, buddy.
I do have a few shows. So do you like Marvel? Do you like Marvel Crisis Protocol? I have a show called Fury's Finest about everything MCP and the Marvel Universe and the MCU as well. Additionally, I have a show titled Hello There. If you just type in Hello There anywhere, you can find podcasts about Star Wars Shatterpoint, Star Wars Legion, and the Star Wars universe. And check out my show, Truth and Reconciliation, with our dear friend Kevin, Johnny and I's dear friend Kevin, about everything Halo Flashpoint in the Halo universe. So there's something for everybody. If you're a Star Wars Miniatures gamer, a Marvel Miniatures gamer, a Halo gamer, or a Trench Crusade gamer, hopefully you can hear me somewhere.
That's right.
And you got me again, Johnny. You got me with the virus, as you mentioned earlier. So it's all good stuff. We cannot wait to talk with you guys on the next episodes. We're going to dive deeper into the game, dive deeper into the rules, dive deeper into the lore. Cannot wait, Johnny, with these episodes that we have in the docket.
I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be a good time.
Well, once again, we really appreciate and love you guys for just checking the show out at all and making it to the end of the episode. So thank you guys again for hanging out with us as we explore everything Trench Crusade and the Trench Crusade universe.
Keep your heads down and stay safe, Saints.